Good morning, everybody. I'm going to try this again. My name is Deborah Byrne from Psychology Services, known across social media as DBpsychology. I was talking about grief, and so this week's blog, if you want to check it out, is at www.deborahbyrnepsychologyservices.com, and it is all about understanding grief. And as I said previously, the blogs are for informational purposes, and they're just to give you a basic understanding of a lot of different conditions and maybe some practical tips that you can take and steps that you can take to help yourself. So, grief. Grief can affect us in many different ways, in terms of it can come after more than just the loss of a person that we love. It can come with the loss of a job, the loss of a pet, the breakdown of a relationship. Anything like that can trigger, and a lot of other more circumstances can actually trigger a grieving period for us, just the same as if we had lost somebody to death. Now, the first thing I'll say to you is, for about the first 6 months, particularly after you've lost somebody or your relationship is broken down, or maybe even if you've lost a job, if you've been in the job for a long time, you'll go through pretty much a roller coaster of emotions. Approximately 6 months, could take up to a year before your emotions start to settle down a little. And we don't recommend people go to therapy for at least the first 6 months. We say to you, hold off, let your emotions, calm down a little bit, and you'll be in a much better frame of mind to receive help. Now, in saying that, if you are worried about yourself or if you're worried about anybody you know, please get help sooner rather than later. Okay, I will just say that if you think somebody is stuck, please get help sooner rather than later, particularly if there's a history there as well. You need to get help sooner rather than later. The amount of time, it's a question people ask me all the time. The amount of time we should grieve for, there is no amount of time. There is no normal grieving period. It all depends very much on what has happened, what triggered the grieving, and the individual. Nobody, people say, oh, you should have moved on by now. It's 6 months down the line. It's a year down the line. No, you don't have to move on that quickly. Okay, it is totally up to you as to when you're ready to move on. But I will talk about getting stuck at certain stages in the grieving period. So if you just bear with me for a minute. The first thing to do, and I always say it's a very good practical step to take, is actually to understand the grieving period. That, grief itself goes through a number of stages. The first stage being denial at the loss of whatever it is, the person, the pet, the job, your relationship. The next stage we'll enter into is anger. We're going to get angry at what has happened. Bargaining would be the next stage. Depression follows on to bargaining, and acceptance now is the last and final stage. In saying that, sometimes people, you're not going to go through all the phases. They don't go through all the phases. Some people go flow from one phase to the other. Some people bounce, you bounce up and down through the phases, and it could be all in one day. In fact, you bounce up and down those phases. And that's not as surprising, particularly in the first 6 months. As I said, your emotions all over the place. Guys, you're going to be all over the place. And that's why we say to kind of let things settle a little. Give yourself time. That's the most important thing you can do for yourself, is to actually give yourself time and allow yourself to grieve. Allow that to happen. People think they have to put on a brave face. They have to be all right. They have to be fine. They have to be grand. Whatever the phrase you want to use, it's okay. Not to be fine, not to be grand. Of course you're not. You need to go through that grieving period. You need to allow yourself to go through that grieving period. And as I said, people can get stuck. There are two common places that people get stuck when they're grieving. One is in the anger phase. You come out of denial, and the shock has worn off, and then suddenly you get angry at what has happened. And sometimes people can get very, very angry. They can lash out at people they don't really mean to lash out at, and they can get stuck in anger. That is one place people can get stuck. The next phase that people can get stuck in, and that would be the depression stage. It's not unusual for people then, when they've reached that stage, to then say, oh, I need help, I need to go and get help. At that point, people do tend to do that. They either realize themselves, or somebody, a loved one, has pointed out to them, you're very down, this is going on too long, and then they go and get help. That is quite common for people to get stuck in that depression stage. The sadness can be very overwhelming, and you know, you need help. You do need help on both of those, in both of those phases. I always like to talk about something practical. So in the blog, I've kind of listed out things that you can do to help yourself. One, as I said, the first thing is to actually understand that there are phases. Some people don't realize that there are phases, or stages, as they're called, of grief. They don't understand what grief is. So if you check out the blog, I'll go into a bit more detail about each stage. And the second point is, you really, and I said it already, you really need to give yourself time. The first year after anybody losing somebody, even if it's a pet, can be very hard. The first Christmas, the first birthday, the first anniversary, you know, if it was a relationship, the first wedding anniversary, all of the firsts are always going to be hard. If it's the loss of a child, the birthdays, the Christmases, it's always going to be hard around those times. Even if it's years down the line, it can still, on the day, it can be very hard. The missed wedding, the missed family event that loved one would have attended can be so difficult for people. And they can get surprised at how, even years down the line, how upset they can be on the day, or how upset they can get in the run up to the event. And they don't realize that, in fact, it's a part of grief, that they are grieving for this loss again. It won't last as long at that point in time, but you know, be ready and be prepared is what I'm saying to you. And you know, it is okay to you know, to sit down and have a cry, and to reminisce, and if you can, and if you want to, you know, bring something of that loved one to the event. Maybe it's just something they gave you. Maybe, you know, some way of including them in the event is always lovely, and it can be so helpful to everybody involved. In terms of that first year or first few years after the circumstances in which you found yourself grieving, I always say to people, you know, surround yourself with good friends and family. Now, when I say good friends and family, I don't mean the negative vampires. Okay, it's now time to go. No, you're gone. You know, no, you're gone. You need people who will understand. You need people who will be there for you, who will support you through the process. Maybe they're going through the same grieving process you are at the time. You know, it's good to have those people to talk to. It also is good to have a support group, and I know there are a lot of groups out there, particularly if it's cancer. There are cancer support, do a lovely, they have great support. They have meditation classes, they have therapy and things like that. A lot of the groups have those free to, or at a very low cost, to family members who have lost